So I picked up a 2022 Toyota GR86, and coincidentally, this is about 10 years after building my first Scion FRS. About 10 years ago, I got proposed to build for the Scion Tuner Challenge. And again, 10 years less experience, 10 years of less resources, but nonetheless, we built what I thought was a pretty cool FRS car, which was sort of a time attack themed race car. Now, fast forward 10 years later, we now have the second gen car, arguably a better car, a more beautiful car. And I wanted to kind of reopen that project. So the same sort of ethos that we had behind the first Scion project, you know, a time attack build, but more directed towards like a Super GT inspired look. And I wanted to see if I could really like stretch myself as a builder after 10 years of working on other projects and other cars to say, can we do something bigger and push it even further in development? So yeah, that's what really kind of started this project.
In the 2012 Scion Tuner Challenge goes to Daniel Song. Daniel Song, round of applause.
The car was well received. I mean, you know, the input and feedback we got from some of our fellow friends during the build process was really positive. And I went to Vegas that year thinking, you know, it was in the bag. Like anything else, nothing is guaranteed. And fortunately or unfortunately, based on the judging criteria, the car didn't quite do as well as I thought it did. But the car continued to get really great love from the internet, from people on social media. And so, you know, I learned something really unique about that, which is, you know, still stay true to the way you want to build, you know what I mean? Build what you think is really cool. And, you know, who really cares about an award at the end of the day, right? And so I felt like we still stayed really true to that project, and I was still really proud of it. And yeah, I mean, yeah, that was really cool.
Part of a new generation, what moves you?
It's been about 10 years between the first project and this current GR86 project. And I feel like every year I'm learning new skill sets, new techniques, meeting the right people, expanding my network. And, you know, I feel like every project should be like a little bit better, a little bit more challenging. And the GR86 was exactly that. It really was a way to test myself as a builder. When you're building for SEMA, you got to kind of propose it to the vendors, say, this is what the project's going to look like. While we were doing renders of that car, I said, hey, why don't we go back and look at if people know about the evasive FRS? And so I kind of as a joke told my 3D artist, hey, like if you have some time, why don't you study the evasive car and put that aero on a GR86 body? And this was completely as a joke. So he shot me back some renders, it looked amazing, and I shot it over to Mike over at Evasive, and Mike's like, dude, that looks badass. If you can pull this off, do it. And so in so many words, it felt like a blessing and a nudge to go out there and do it. So we went and we started looking at those cars for inspiration. We were looking at videos on YouTube, whatever photos we could find on the internet, and we began to start to design, you know, on paper, what we thought would be the ideal translation of a street version of a Super GT car. You know, I started reaching out to a good friend of mine. His name is Caleb out of Sayber Designs. Caleb's company had done a few composite parts already. And at first he kind of laughed. He responded with laughing emojis, and you know, he didn't know how serious I was. And I said, no, I want to partner with you guys. I want to commission you guys to kind of produce this kit for me. And so we took those initial renders and then started to translate that into CAD design, because you know, the CAD files is what allows us to go out there and mill out the, you know, the original molds and the original prototype parts. You know, how do we keep the look, but how do we also make it practical for production, right? Because depending on how complex the parts are, the curves, the undulations, that determines how many pieces the molds are going to be. Every mold that they need to make increases the cost to me. And so we would get the front fender dialed in and we'd say, okay, this is good, green light this. And literally the front fender would go and start getting milled, and then we would move on to the side skirt. And so it was kind of a risk, because again, if we made any revisions along the way, we would have to go back and revisit those original things. The airfoil arrived at my house literally 2 days before the car went to SEMA. So it wasn't like we had all the pieces ready to go. I mean, we were trying to pump these out one by one as quickly as possible, and then we would go get molds made of this fender. But we didn't know how that was gonna look against the rear fender, or how it was gonna look in conjunction with the side skirt and the barge boards. I mean, you know, there's one example where we were at a shop and we were test fitting the mock-up of the rear diffuser. You know, does this wing look obnoxious? Like maybe this is not the right thing. And so there were a lot of areas, like individual components of the car, that I began to second guess in the process. And it really wasn't until about, again, the week before SEMA, where all the parts arrived and it all started to go on the car, that everything started to make sense and really fell into place. And there was just this like 11th hour love that happened where I was just like, oh my God, this is looking absolutely phenomenal right now.
So we're just a couple days away from the big SEMA show, and we're actually working on the final assembly of the car. The molds are completed. The first sort of article pieces are now back. So there's still a lot of prototyping and fitment tests that we're doing. The good news is it's working really, really well. We're discovering a lot about probably the most optimal way to sort of secure and mount the aero. All the little fit and finish details that we want to make sure that looks really, really good before the car debuts. And then it's off to AeroWorks for the livery on its debut.
I love all of it, but there are certain areas that came together and it was like magical. It was like a divine moment. It's like serendipitous, right? You know, the front fender winglet, that sort of shape, we went through so many revisions, because if you look at the stock GR86, there's actually a factory sort of vent in that sort of lower fender. And we wanted to sort of emulate that shape and that silhouette, but also, again, capture the Super GT fender style. And so when that winglet sort of kind of came together and we looked at the overall silhouette, that was probably one of my favorite areas. And that came out perfectly, because what it allowed, I mean, again, if you study the current Super GT cars, one, that's the way it looks. It's not these like sort of like slapped on flares. They look like they're an organic extension of the car, and so that's really cool. It isn't a one-to-one representation of what a Super GT car can look like. There's no way you can achieve that. There's literally no way that can be achieved, but I felt like if we could just anchor some of these key elements, I knew people would immediately identify what that car was. Whether the aero was gonna really withstand downforce and really the rigors of racing, that was to be proven. It was kind of a TBA, because like, I mean, if you think about it, at SEMA, the car is sitting there static on a show floor. It can look pretty and it doesn't have to necessarily be functional, but we knew that we wanted to go to a racetrack. And so we had the opportunity to race at Global Time Attack 1 week after SEMA was done. So as soon as the car came back from Vegas, we unloaded it and it went immediately into track prep mode. And 5 days later, it was on a truck heading up to Buttonwillow to be at the Global Time Attack Finals to run its sort of initial shakedown. And I'm happy to say the car went in one piece and it came home in one piece. And seeing that car going down the straights of Buttonwillow, going around the corners, it's a different satisfaction that I've never felt with any of the other builds. And you know, we knew we didn't have a competitive car, so we weren't looking for record-breaking numbers here. I mean, it was a stock-powered GR86. What we wanted to do was to see, and again, validate the aero, that it was working and that the car was, you know, gonna do what it's supposed to do and earn a respectable time. And, you know, happy to report that we were able to do a sub 2 at Buttonwillow. We did a 1:59.32. And we were ecstatic with it. I mean, to be able to nab that sub 2 time on a stock powered GR86 was incredible. Yeah, I think everything we set out to do with the project, you know, to do sort of a custom design kit from design all the way to manufacturing or the production of the kit, that challenge was fulfilled. And I felt like all the people that we worked with delivered on their part of the project, and we were able to do something that was sort of beyond what I thought was possible. We're excited to see what other people do with it. I think it'd be kind of cool to see the kit on other color cars, other livery treatments. You know, I think it'd be really cool to see what people do with the overall product.